Okay, here we go. And a 1, a 2, a 1, 2. Welcome to the Beyond the Expected podcast. Dr. Sharon Nachman, thank you so much for taking time to talk with us. Let's start with a quick question about you. I always like to ask my guests, what got you interested in becoming a physician and more specifically a specialist in pediatric infectious disease?
So I was always interested in being a detective. And infectious disease means you get to be a detective every day of your working career. I'm the child of immigrants. My parents came to the United States after World War II, after being in DP camps, after surviving Nazi Germany, and they had no education. They didn't have any college. They had maybe some high school when they got here, and they always pushed their children to get educated because you could always take it with you. I went to high school, and then I was very fortunate to get to the 6-year BSMD program at City College. The good news is it was 6 years, and the great news is it was free. So I very much benefited from New York State's CUNY, SUNY partnerships for funding my academic career. When in college, I was very excited about microbiology. The whole idea of these are pathogens, they're smarter than us, we have to be smarter than them, really intrigued me. And that was the first part of me being interested in infectious disease. I did my residency in New York. I did my fellowship at Lincoln in the South Bronx, which meant I used to do international medicine, but I went home every day. When I was at Lincoln, I saw the first measles outbreak that we had in the United States in New York, and we had an entire ward full of children with measles. And you can only imagine how much it bothered me to say, we could have prevented this infection and we didn't. I saw kids with malaria, I saw kids with leprosy, and I was just fascinated.
So you knew all along you'd made the right career choice. There's never any doubt here. I mean, roads not taken, anything like that.
No, I went to work happy every day. Wow. What am I going to see next? You can only imagine when my first case of leprosy came in and I called on my friends, guess what I saw today? Leprosy. Isn't that exciting? You can imagine they weren't as excited as I was.
Not as excited as you. I mean, you mentioned some extraordinary experiences just now. Is there a particular most challenging, most memorable case that you reflect on?
So when I was at Stony Brook as a young physician, I joined Stony Brook in the 1990s. Our first child came in with a resistant, vancomycin-resistant enterococcal infection. It was a 3-year-old. She had been born premature. She had multiple gut issues. Her gut was not connected. And she was basically dying of this resistant bacteria. And I remembered, and in those days we took notes. We didn't have computers. We didn't have tablets. When you went to a conference, you wrote everything down. I went through my notes and I found an antibiotic that was not licensed, not approved, didn't even have a name. And I called the pharmacy company that was making it and I said, hey, it's Sharon. I have a kid I'd love to try this antibiotic on. And after they recovered from their shock and said, who are you? What do you want from us? I said, can you ship me some drug? I have a kid who needs it. We contacted the FDA emergently at that time. They said, if you write a compassionate use study, we'll ship you the drug. I sat down on that day, I wrote a study. We got compassionate use approval from the IRB. The company shipped us the drug on a Saturday. I sat there, waited for FedEx. I walked it over to the pediatric ICU and hung it up for that child. And the good news is she survived. And that really was a life changer, not only for me, but actually for the company, because they had no intentions of ever looking to study that drug in children because they thought children don't get those kind of infections. I was called to testify before Congress, and that was part of went into the bill that said you must actually test every medication you're approving now, children as well.
So you not only saved a life, but you actually saved a drug. It sounds like this company was going to back shelf it, but then realized there was real potential here.
They were going to not study children. Clinic. They were going to use it in adults and kind of sign off as kids as not appropriate, we don't need it. And that really changed it.
Wow, what a great memory. Speaking of challenging diseases, we're confronting something as we speak globally, the coronavirus outbreak that seems to have started in China. In your view, be interested in your impressions about this episode, but perhaps most importantly, given your opening comments, could this thing have been prevented? What do you see happening here that might have gone in a different way?
I don't think infections can be prevented globally. I think they should be thought about, caught as soon as they can, and then treated and prevented more infections from happening. This coronavirus is similar to two other outbreaks of coronavirus we've had in the past decade. The first one was SARS, also a coronavirus that went from animal hosts to humans and progressed. Good news, the epidemic stopped. And MERS, which is the Middle Eastern variety of it, which also started in animals, passed to humans, which is occurring episodically now only in the Middle East, but not passing to the U.S. So this is not the first time we're seeing a novel coronavirus. These all have similar types of presentations with respiratory illness and look almost like the flu illness that we're having. What's really nice now is we have the tools to identify when the epidemic is starting and also have the tools to say how to stop and prevent it from traveling further. So I think we're smarter now than we were a decade ago, but you and I both know that it's going to happen again in the future, and we have to use the tools that we have now or the next generation of those tools to also prevent that one from spreading.
Well, and you mentioned, it's interesting, all of these episodes involving these microbes transitioning from animal hosts to human beings. So it sounds like there's something in the background there about how we're managing animal stocks and how humans are interacting with them.
Well,
right?
of course, the humans are going into where the animals are living. We're going to their environment. We're in much more close contact with them. And also we have to feed people around the world. And that requires having animals and humans, again, come into close contact. So there's lots of interesting data about animal hosts. And there's even a nice study that looked at, can animals carry antibiotic resistance? And if they do, how do they get it? Is it us giving them feed that contains antibiotics? Or more interestingly, is it the animals being around flies that contain antibiotic resistance, passing it to the animals and then passing it to us? So the answer is it's probably a bit of both. Antibiotic overuse really hurts all of us, and we have to be very, very careful. And when I hear people today talking about, oh, I have the flu, I need an antibiotic, I really want to say stop. Right. It's viral. Don't take an antibiotic.
Don't take an antibiotic. Just lie down and take a few days to recover.
More importantly, don't cough on your friends.
Well, let's talk a bit about a topic that's on the minds of many of us in New York, but especially parents with school-age children here in the state of New York, which are your thoughts on the new vaccine law that's been proposed in the state. This is a law that would require grade school students to receive the HPV vaccine, for example, and obviously there's a broader debate going on about vaccination requirements, but interested in your impressions of this law.
So the first is, I'm very excited that New York State is one of the states taking the lead on requiring vaccination for school-age children. I think that's very important to protect our community. As you know, vaccines are good for the person, good for their family, and good for the community. So community protection is the kind of thing we in New York State, as well as other states, should take very seriously. When you get in a car and you want to take my child in the car with you, I want you to seatbelt my kid. Put them in a car seat. I kind of don't want them just hanging out in the back seat. I think of vaccines the same way. They're there, we should use them, and they can prevent further damage. With regard to the HPV vaccine, I've heard all sorts of interesting talk about it. Oh, it's going to make children think they should have sex. That's not going to happen. Number one, children think lots of things without us parents knowing about them, and I have 3 kids, so believe me, I know that they think about lots of things. So a vaccine isn't going to tell them, go ahead and have sex. But when you realize that countries like Australia, who have mandated HPV vaccine for all children, have actually shown that the rates of cervical and genital urinary cancers have dropped, don't we want to be that country as well? Don't we want to be those parents to say, great, I'm protecting you and your partners from all of the viruses in the vaccine, so that means 10, 20 years from now, you're not going to get those cancers. You'll be safe.
So, you've commented generally about vaccines, and you've drawn this very powerful analogy to seatbelting. So, vaccines are safe, yes?
I think vaccines are safe. I've been vaccinated, my children have been vaccinated, and my grandchildren have also been vaccinated.
What's your sense of how communities, in particular here on Long Island, are responding to these issues?
Long Island is made up of multiple communities. We have communities that are low income, high income, everything in the middle, communities that are born in New York, raised here, or immigrated here from other countries. So there's not one community in Long Island. On the other hand, I think we have, for the most part, doctors that encourage vaccination, and we should be very careful about listening to the parents who don't want to vaccinate, understanding why.
Well, that was you've anticipated another question. I mean, obviously, you deal with parents with all sorts of points of view. Obviously, you must come in contact with parents who do not believe vaccines are safe, or they're hesitant about their children being vaccinated. How do you deal with that?
So the first question I ask is, were they vaccinated? And if the parents were vaccinated, I say, if you were vaccinated, it was safe for you, it's going to be safe for your child. But more importantly, tell me what you're worried about. Oftentimes, they're responding to some chatter they saw online about vaccines containing chemicals that aren't true anymore. We don't have any thimerosal in our vaccines. So worrying about that, that's not an issue. Worrying about the side effects. Everyone worries that HPV causes illness in girls. What's interesting is that illness or fainting that they talk about hasn't happened in boys or in any other country. So you have to worry, was it real or not real? With regard to some of the other toxicities people talk about vaccines, I say, tell me where you saw that. Let's read it together. Let's interpret it together, and let's talk about it. The vast majority of parents who are hesitant will actually be talked around and explained to and say, yes, I want my vaccine. The minority of them that don't want to get vaccinated or any vaccine, you have to explain to them the risks of those illnesses. Because the last thing I want someone to say is, she didn't explain it well to me. That's why I didn't get vaccinated. As you can imagine, not all illnesses are the same. Do I want to prevent meningitis in my kid? Absolutely. Those vaccines, meningococcal and pneumococcal, are fantastic, great, and we want every kid to get them. When they think about other vaccines, I say, well, you're right, we don't have any polio now, but you realize your child can never leave Long Island, because if they're going to get on a plane and travel, we don't know who they're going to see and what they're going to see. Tetanus, I guess you don't want your child to play outside, because tetanus is not spread from person to person, but from dirt. And that means that any time they're in the garden or in the playground, they are at risk of exposure. Do you really want your child to miss out on all that playing activity?
And has it been your experience that these kinds of conversations are transformative for these parents?
Again,
or is it hard to generalize?
I think for 90% it is. The 10% that it's not, there's nothing you can say or do. They will not budge on their opinion. And I say, all right, that's okay. But at any time you want to come back and talk again, I'm here to talk to you.
Do you feel, I mean, given all your work with infectious diseases, especially in the pediatric setting, I mean, do you feel that this is the most important aspect of the work? What do you think is the most important aspect of your work here on Long Island?
I think there's more than one thing.
ID.
You can't say one is more important than the other. Do I think vaccines are important? Yes. Do I think antibiotics and using them appropriately is important? Yes. Do I think preventing illness is important? Yes. So the answer is, would I want to do one and ignore the others? No. I'd really put them all equally and say, we want the best for your child. We want to keep your kids healthy. And if that means I have to think about more than one thing at any time, I will.
But in the span of your practice to date, is it reasonable to say that things have changed in recent years, that you're confronting opposition, questions, and anxieties in ways you hadn't earlier in your career, or has it been a steady pattern of questions?
I think the vaccine movement has gotten more resistant. Perhaps it's due to social media. Perhaps it's due to the fact that they are getting what they perceive as more vaccines. In the old days, when diphtheria, tetanus, and pertussis vaccine was first developed, it was a whole cell vaccine.
Right.
And that meant it had 1,000 different antigens in it. The current DTaP has maybe 3 or 4 pertussis antigens. The perception is, oh, it's a new vaccine, it's not safe. Actually, it's got less in it, and it's much safer than the old vaccine that you and I got. Mm-hmm. So go with the new vaccine. Parents are nervous that we're exposing their children to too many things in their vaccines. So I ask them, so does your kid crawl on the floor? Yeah. Do they eat the shoes and the carriage wheels like my kids did? Are they teething? They're seeing more antigens every day by crawling on the floor than they see at any time from the vaccines we give them. And if your kid goes to daycare, You can only imagine they're seeing infinitely more illnesses in daycare and exposures more in daycare than anything we would have in our vaccines.
And we are vaccinating for more things today than in our generation.
Which is great news.
Right. But it's an interesting point you made. I never thought of it in quite those terms, that then parents are thinking, oh, there are all these vaccines that never existed before. Why is that?
Right. We just had the diseases then.
Yes, right.
It's not like these are new diseases. The diseases were there. Good news is we're preventing some of them now, and that's kind of really nice for us.
So I guess a version of this question would be, what keeps you up at night? Do you feel this is the most important challenge right now for pediatric infectious diseases specialists like yourself? What are the things that you worry about the most?
Things I worry about the most are more resistant bacteria, because I think that's a global problem that keeps marching forward. We're losing antibiotics at a fast clip, and the bacteria, as I think of them, are much smarter than we are.
So when you say losing antibiotics, you mean their effectiveness?
Their effectiveness is no longer as good. If you go to sub-Saharan Africa and you get a diarrheal illness or typhoid or something, the routine antibiotics won't work. If you get malaria, what we would have used routinely 10 years ago or 5 years ago doesn't work anymore. So we need to develop bigger and better antibiotics and prevent them from being abused or overused, and we're not so good at that. As you can imagine, with our current flu outbreaks, we're seeing tons of children going to local walk-in centers, and everybody's walking out with an antibiotic. But they have flu. They shouldn't be. But the idea is that I need to give them something to make them better. Here, take this. And the parents want to give their kids something because the perception is you're a bad parent if you do nothing, and you're a good parent if you're giving your kid a medicine. Unfortunately, as you can imagine, with viral illnesses, that just doesn't work.
Right. I mean, it's an interesting point. I mean, that's certainly the messaging that comes through from advertising and so forth. Use this, use this,
We have to give you something.
Right.
That those days of chicken soup and tea with honey are not on advertising.
And the days of, I have vivid memories of that. I came down with a pretty good case of chicken pox, and when the word went out in the neighborhood, all the kids came to play with me.
Yeah, we don't like to do that anymore.
No, not anymore. But back then it was like, great, I want my kid to get it too, so he or she'll be immune.
Unfortunately, they were immune because they got their chicken pox, but those are the patients that we're seeing now that have zoster.
Right.
And the good news is the kids that got chicken pox vaccine will never get shingles. And when you weigh it out, I'm really kind of excited that that next generation of children won't suffer as adults.
Suffer from that. That's a very good point. I always like to ask my guests. So if you could go back and speak to the young Sharon, the Sharon in high school who was anticipating going on to advanced study in college and beyond, given all that you now know, what would you tell her?
Study more. It's interesting. When I was a young medical student and then a resident, I tried to read everything, and then I blew stuff off. Back in the early 1980s, I read an MMWR, a publication from the CDC, Morbidity and Mortality Weekly Report, and it talked about a couple of patients out in California, in San Francisco, who came down with a respiratory illness, and they all hung out in bathhouses, and only men. And I thought, this has nothing to do with me. It's men, it's adults, they're in a bathhouse in California. Has nothing to do with me. Of course, that was the first case of PCP pneumonia in HIV-infected patients. I was wrong. It has a lot to do with me. And since then, I've spent countless years working on HIV, new treatments, new diagnosis, therapeutics, and prevention. So I would say to the younger Sharon, don't blow those papers off.
Well, and one final question in that regard. What would you say to the younger Sharon? I mean, you were a trailblazer in your generation, a woman going on to medical school. I mean, there are more women in medicine today, but it's
Correct.
Thanks to people like you in your generation said, I'm pursuing this path, even though it's not been the traditional path for women. So what advice would you give in that regard?
I guess follow your dreams. The worst thing someone can tell me is, no, you can't do that. I think it was true then. It's true now. Anyone that says to me, no, you can't, that's sort of the red flag in front of me going, of course I can, and I'm going to show you how. I remember when I was applying to the 6-year BSMD program, the principal in my high school said, you know, if you want to marry a doctor, there's a much easier way to do that. And you could imagine my husband is not a physician.
Well, that's a great point. And I want to thank you, Dr. Sharon Nachman, for spending some time with us today. It's a fascinating conversation.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.